looked all very good. Welcome back. This is our final panel. André Farand, the one I have the pleasure to introduce, is a graduate of the Institute of Air and Space Law of McGill University. He did his thesis on Canada's claim due to the damages caused by the crash of the Soviet satellite Cosmos 954, which came down in 1978. André is a lawyer, you understand, specialized in questions related to international coordination in space. He is responsible for legal aspects of manned space programs, for instance, the negotiation of agreements concerning the participation of countries, including Canada, to the International Space Station. André works at present at the Legal Affairs Department of the European Space Agency. André.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm the moderator for this afternoon session, and Robert Veldhuyzen will talk after me, and Kathy Laurini also, who you have seen yesterday, will also talk. We are three persons, and I will introduce them when their presentation is to be made. Now, I will give you today some general ideas of the experience we got from space station negotiations, and there are considerations we didn't discuss really up to now, because we discussed the projects, what we try to achieve in outer space, but there are considerations which are very practical and we have to take into consideration. One is, first, just reminding you about the legal structure we established for space station cooperation. It's a three-tier structure. Many people know that. First, there is an intergovernmental agreement. We refer that as IGA. There are 4 MOUs. They are very similar, and they are between NASA and each of the other cooperating agencies, so CSA, ESA, the Japanese government, and Roscosmos. And there are some implementing arrangements, called IA here, which are developed when necessary. There are not that many implementing arrangements. On the ESA side, we have 2 of them. Now, why was it decided to involve government-level, treaty-level commitments for that project? It's because of mainly 3 reasons. First, the significant funding needs reaching multi-billion dollars level for each party and making a multi-year financial commitment essential. So we cannot commit only 1 year at a time. We had to commit for many years to build a space station and to operate it. And we talked about the price yesterday, about $100 billion. The figure I have would be around $60 billion for constructing, developing the station, and another $60 billion to have it work and exploited during 10, 15 years. So it's a significant investment by the parties that a space agency alone could not maybe provide on the long term. Second reason, the duration of the project. From the beginning, in the mid-80s, it was established that it would be about 30-year project. And after that, some people said it could be shorter, could be 10, 15 years. But in reality, we are doing the 30 years since we started negotiations, or we finished the first negotiation in '88. And now we know that there's a strong possibility that the partnership goes at least at the end, up to the end of 2020 and maybe beyond. So it's more than 30 years. But in reality, the agreements are open-ended. There is no termination date. That means to terminate, one or several partners have to send notice of termination to the United States. That maybe nobody will do. And then, or there should be an agreement among the partners that by that date it should be finished or transformed to another agreement. So that's it's open-ended. That means that when we talk about the end of 2020 as the milestone, it's a programmatic milestone. It's not written into the agreements. And third, there was a third reason, is that many of the subjects that have to be considered for that cooperation go beyond the capacities, the competences, the prerogatives of any space agency. Very obvious one, criminal jurisdiction, Article 22 of the IGA. This is under the responsibility of the Departments of Justice of the member states, the partner states. And, but there are many other subjects like this that go beyond the capacity of any space agency to regulate. So that's for the current structure for the cooperation, which makes it, as we said yesterday, quite solid. It can resist because having international agreements being ratified, being enforced, gives you a framework in which you can work for a long time. Another thing, it's like we did for the program issues, we have to define when we start a negotiation on a project between partners or representatives of partners, what are the different requirements and parameters of the project. From an administrative point of view, for example, you have to decide what would be the management structure, what kind of committees or series of committees do you have to establish. And that Cathy Laurini will tell you more about what I call the cooperation bodies created for the space station. So, but also legal. When we started in the mid-80s, personally I started in January '87 in the legal group for a space station, we had to identify the list of subjects that we have to cover to do what we call the legal regime of the stations. In the IGA, the agreement, there are a number of articles dealing with specific legal issues, criminal jurisdiction, liability, intellectual property, that kind of things, that is more a legal issue. But I recall, I tell you that the whole IGA being a legally binding instrument, all the articles, even if they were not written completely by lawyers, they had to be reviewed to make sure they are compatible with the legal commitment being expressed. So you have to define the requirements also from a legal standpoint. And a second thing, you have to with these parameters, with these requirements, to see what are the stakeholders within your own organizations. So let's say in the case of the ISS, it starts with the government as a whole, because the government signs on behalf of the country the agreement, but then a number of departments, ministries are involved. Department of Justice for criminal jurisdiction, department dealing with intellectual property for other things. So there are a number of people you have to involve from the beginning into the negotiation. And I say that because you involve mainly also people from foreign affairs, from Department of External Affairs, for example. Why? And these people, they come for this negotiation, they stay the time it takes for the negotiation, but they are not specialists of space activities. They are specialists of international agreements. And you have to get their interest in your subject, which is space and space station, so that the negotiation can proceed. So when I say stakeholders, I mean public stakeholders, governments, but sometimes private stakeholders, and maybe more in the future, where I believe the private space sector, the individual companies, will be associated closely to negotiations, as it is the case today, for example, for air agreements, where in government exchange traffic rights for airlines. Well, airlines are very much associated with the work of governments in developing these instruments. Now, there's a concept that was developed for the space station in the mid-80s. It was called the genuine partnership, and it's written in the first sentence of Article 1.1 of the agreement, IGA, and it was proposed originally by the European partner and was adopted by the others, including the US partner, and it was adapted to the magnitude and complexity of the cooperation. It was developed by opposition, I would say, to other models of cooperation used in the past, which were not fully satisfactory for the interested parties. And there I'm thinking personally to the Space Lab model, where we had MOUs, so Memorandum of Understanding between space agencies. They were translating the idea that there was a junior partner and a more senior partner. You can imagine who is the senior partner. And the senior partner was deciding on many things, on the requirements, and imposing these requirements without discussion to the junior partner, resulting in these programs, at least in the case of Europe, being 3 times more expensive than expected at the beginning. So when we got to the space station, that model didn't suit the representatives of the other partners. And so that's why the genuine partnership was invented. I want also to allude to the fact that for Europe, there is a particularly complex situation. So today there are 11 signatory states composing the European partner. 10 of them are participating in the ESA program necessary to discharge their obligations. So they don't discharge their obligation through their own money at national level, but they put their money into a ESA optional program called ISS Exploitation at this time to deliver on their obligation they sign up to in the agreement. Now, one of these states signed, it's the United Kingdom, because they had signed the first agreement in 1988. So in 1998 they signed again as part of the European partner, but they don't participate in the program, in the financing of the program, and they, by their signature, they allowed the agreement to be changed, to be amended and replaced. Now, so 3 things. European partner is the only partner of the station composed of a number of states. Sometimes it has global obligations, sometimes it has separate obligations per each state. For example, criminal jurisdiction, obviously it's an obligation for each state. If there is an alleged perpetrator of a criminal act, it's up to the state of nationality to start prosecution. So, but all that is a bit expressed in the IGA itself. Now, you think today the situation of the European partner is complicated, and it's still, but it will be more complicated next time we enter into a negotiation, because then the European Union role will be much more developed than it is today. Now you have to decide, and we have to discuss in Europe, where would the funding from these activities come from the EU long-term financial perspective, or from national budgets, as it is the case today through ESA, or a combination of both. So either you have ESA with its 19 member states, or EU with 27 member states today, more next year. So it will be a bit complex to manage all that. It will be very interesting to manage all that. But the IGA is the first instrument taking care of a very complex European situation. And finally, when I was talking about implementing arrangements, one of the conditions for implementing arrangements is that NASA always be a party to these arrangements, so as to ensure consistency in the obligations. Now, there are a small number of real implementing arrangements. There is one for the launch of Columbus in 2008, and there is one for the provision by Europe of Cupola, but they are the only 2 ones that have been concluded at this point. But there are about 10, 15, or 20 other agreements which have no status of implementing arrangements, which have been signed between ESA and NASA for other aspects of the cooperation, like a series of utilization agreements, or the provision of some barter elements for early utilization of the station. So the constellation of agreements today we have to develop, to administer, to implement about 45 different agreements, at least on the European side, but there are smaller agreements and the larger agreements. So it takes a lot of, let's say, energy to know about all the details of the agreements. Now, I want to come back on the genuine partnership. And I say all that, it's also, we have to ask the question to ourselves, will future cooperation built on genuine partnership? Genuine partnership assumes a certain equality among the members. And I think this is fairly accepted, that there is equality among the 5 partners to the space station. But obviously there are partners that are more equal than the others. And the first one is, well, the first one and the second one is in the first category given in Article 1 of the IGA. They are the United States and Russia, because they provide elements serving at the foundation of the ISS. So first level, the United States and Russia. Second level, Japan and the European partner states, because they provide elements significantly enhancing the ISS capabilities, meaning laboratories like the Kibo and Columbus. And finally, there's a kind of junior partner, Canada, although it provides an essential element of the infrastructure in the form of Canadarm2 and the Dexter manipulator. So it's a partnership, but with different contributions, and also there is a lead role of the United States, because you need a program integrator, you need a partner which is responsible for administering or leading the whole and managing, in fact, the activities of the whole partnership. Now, as a consequence of the concept of genuine partnership, each partner retains jurisdiction and control over the elements it provides. That means in the station, you go from the US jurisdiction to when you enter into Columbus, you are in a jurisdiction of a series of European states. And in fact, European states exercise jurisdiction according to their own national law. The easiest example is Germany, which has made the IGA part of the law of Germany. So each time for Germany, there is no question what's happening on board Columbus could be dealt with at national level in courts in case of disputes. Same thing for Canada, and France, which made the IGA part of the law, national law of their country. Now, so there are three consequences: retain jurisdiction and control for each of their elements. Each partner bear the cost of fulfilling its responsibilities, including accruing a share of common costs which it has to pay. So that's an obligation. We are all sharing on a certain percentage the common cost. And finally, each partner participates in the decision done by consensus in each of the bodies of the cooperation. Now, also as a consequence of the partnership, there's the question of the management. The genuine partnership enables the partner to be responsible, each one of them, for the management of its own program, including utilization, system engineering, integration of the elements they provide. Same thing for NASA, but in addition, for NASA, it is responsible for the overall program management and coordination of the ISS and everything else there which is listed. And finally, there is an obligation of each partner to support the NASA and the United States in the performance of its overall responsibilities. Now, it's not always easy to accept that there is a leader, but this was fairly obvious when you think that the United States, NASA, has 76.6% of the utilization rights of the station minus the Russian segment. For the Russian segment, the regime is a more kind of autonomous section of the station for the purpose of calculating the utilization rights and calculating the share which has to be paid in terms of common cost. That means for the non-Russian part, the United States has to face 76.6% of the ISS cost, common cost. For Canada, it's 2.3%. For Europe, it's 8.3%. And for Japan, 12.5%. So, in other words, the United States has to face a bill which is about 9 times what Europe has to pay. Now, talking about lesson learned briefly, just to say that yesterday Bruno Gardini referred to the fact that the lawyers are important in this negotiation. I believe it's important, but in fact, in an agency like ESA, the legal department is a support department. That means it has a role to make the programs possible, to establish the program. And we do it in fact, main part of our role is to negotiate with the member states the agreements that we call declaration of programs, optional programs, which will enable them to subscribe, so to put money and fund programs. In other words, our role is to go and get funding for our programs from the member states. There is another series of lawyers inside the agency, which is in the procurement department, which takes the money and then spend it in the form of procurement of goods and services for our programs. There are 65 lawyers on that side. On the other side, on our side, we are 20 lawyers dealing mainly with the member state and the funding of our programs. Obviously, we have to make the link between the two services because we have to negotiate things which are easily implementable on the contract side. But so it tells you that the lawyer is important because you have to get the funding. You have to present to a member state texts which are acceptable for them. And there are two series of texts. They are the declaration, which is the agreement among themselves to fund the program. And there are international agreements, in the case of the space station, which at the time in the 90s, it was taking about 50% of the time to prepare the international agreements, because they have to agree, the member states, that the clauses, the conditions you negotiate in international agreements are compatible with their commitment within the agency and they are acceptable. So, in other words, you need the funding to do anything else after that, and that's why we have in the legal department a support role, but a role which is as its importance. Now, in the negotiation, there I mentioned that in the mid-80s, the Americans started negotiation on a bilateral basis with a series of partners. They went to Ottawa, they went to Paris, they went to Japan, to Tokyo, for negotiations, one after the other. But after a while, we all decided that it was unpracticable. It was better to have an agreement which was multilateral. That's why today the IGA is multilateral. It's also because in a multilateral negotiation, each party brings its own contribution and it can be discussed by everyone and accepted by everyone. So that's also a question to decide for the future. If there is more than two partners, how would you conduct the negotiation? Possibly on a multilateral basis or possibly not. Now, also, something we faced very early in the negotiation, and we will face next time we have a negotiation, is the formalism required by the respective administrations for the commitments in an agreement or in an MOU, or even the wording of it, the way you express obligations, is something which is discussed for hours. And you have, as a lawyer, to be able to explain your formalism for your own system and see how the other systems in front of you, the Japanese system, the American system, would, let's say, be consistent or not with your own system, and try to find a solution. Example, for the space station, the Americans decided from the beginning that they would not change their US laws to accommodate the obligations under the convention, under the ISS IGA. That means that the IGA is written in a certain manner which makes it compatible with the situation of US law as it was in the 1980s, and it can evolve, and still the obligations is compatible as written in the IGA. So it was a preoccupation of formalism for the American negotiators to stay within the boundaries of their national laws. You have to be very careful about the series of procedures which are required to enter into force all the obligations. And this could be a nightmare. In the case of the ISS, it was very difficult. Just giving you an example, the second IGA, first one was 88, second, January 98, entered into force in 2001, entered into force for the European partner in 2005. It took a long time to bring all the Europeans together. And then we forgot about the MOU. Well, we not really had forgotten, but then when we were about to launch Columbus at the end of 2007, the first try we did in the end of 2007, then NASA told us, oh, we forgot to enter into force formally the MOU, because we had to exchange a letter to have that into force. So we signed it in 98, we entered it into force through a simple letter in October 2007. So, but all people have to be aware, or certain people, that step 1, step 2, and step 3 have to be completed before something is happening. So not only you should understand your system, but you should understand the other system, so you are sure that you don't forget something. So formalism required, and you have to be ready to deal with this formalism and explain to the others your own requirements. Now, in the negotiation, you call experts. You try normally to have legal experts. It was the case in the ISS, where there was a dedicated legal group created. It was not one representative by state, it was mainly 2 or 3 representatives per partner. And they are the ones that listed which are the subjects which should constitute the legal regime of the station, and which are the other subjects that can, from a legal standpoint, be looked at. So there was the development of a dedicated legal regime during the negotiation, and in fact, as we said before for the engineers, we created a community of lawyers who understand the space station legal regime. And we are very proud of that. I think one of the big achievements of the ISS is the legal regime, and the community of lawyers that we have who understand the legal regime. And this is so clear that when the Russians came in the 1990s to join the space station, the legal regime was not changed. It took them a number of months to understand what was in it, but the legal regime remains as it did, except for criminal jurisdiction and 1 sentence for the Japanese in the cross waiver of liability. But mainly it remained as it was adopted without the Russians in 1988. And today we have this community of lawyers. We're able to go forward, negotiate new agreements for station, but not only for station, for everything else. Every cooperation we have with NASA or with Roscosmos, we borrow clauses from the space station. Now, also, another thing I want to mention, I will be relatively brief for the rest, is to say that it was the first time in the ISS, we have to think about that for the next cooperation we start with, that we had to translate in domestic law the obligations negotiated by the states in the IGA. So there is all kind of a technique for that, but you have to go to Parliament mainly to have it ratified, and it becomes part of the law. And this enables you to assert jurisdiction and control as a state on not only the modules, the facilities, but also on the personnel, on the astronauts. And that's why today, although the astronauts in Europe are staff members of ESA, they have a link with their own national country in terms of obligations for the ISS operations. Exploitation. Now, access of a new partner, there is no adhesion clauses in the IGA. Each time you want a new partner, you have to reopen negotiations. And what we did in 1993, when we started negotiations with the Russians, is that we met in Paris and we said, we will change the minimum required in this agreement in the IGA so that Russian can enter in 3 months from now or 6 months from now. Well, negotiation lasted 4 years, and we did a little bit more than the minimum required. We made it a real, genuine partnership because of the Russians coming into the partnership. So what about China, for example, in the IGA? 2 years ago, we had a meeting of the heads of heads of agencies for the space station in Tokyo in March 2010, and everyone said we need to bring the best, the states who are interested to come and do the best science on the best facilities, which is the space station. So the Chinese, the Indians, etc. But it is clear, I think for everyone, we don't want to reopen the IGA, negotiate 4 years, because the station as it is today, it has been developed, it makes sense technically, and we don't want to negotiate 4 years and then have a new partner providing a module for the next 15 years. So we have now to think about new ways. And when we say we need to start with the space station to explore and continue exploration of space, well, we have to think about new ways without necessarily becoming partners, but new formula to bring people to do experiments on board the station from other countries. Today we have a very stringent conditions for that, and maybe to have an evolution of the station towards an exploration. And there's an article in the IGA, Article 14, which foresaw the possibility to have an evolution of the partnership. So when we say the ISS Partnership could be the basis to expand in other projects of the exploration, well, maybe on the basis of Article 14 of the IGA, we would be able to do that. So that was my presentation for today, the general presentation. Now, I would like to introduce the second speaker in this session, Robert Veldhuyzen. And although I have a long page of notes, I would say that Robert, who is a former staff member of ESA, who has retired a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, has been in ESA more than 30 years, and his last assignment was head of the programmatic division of the Directorate of Human Spaceflight of ESA, and as such he was very instrumental in preparing all the agreements from '97 for the space station. Together with the legal service, so we had to talk about every day for 12 years on developing the station, interpreting the agreements. Just saying also that Robert Veldhuyzen earned his Master of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering in 1970 from Delft University of Technology, which specialization is aircraft stability and control. But Robert is still very much involved in space activities, and he will tell you about his experience in the space station context.
Okay, thank you, André. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity to share my experience with you. Just up front, as André said, I have now since a good 2.5 years retired status. Makes it easy for me. I'm speaking only on behalf of myself, and certainly not on behalf of my previous employer. So if I say any stupid things, don't blame ESA, but just blame myself. I want to focus, let me see how this works. Yeah, I want to focus my presentation on basically 4 topics. Of course, as a retired person, you have the tendency to look backwards, and to some extent I try to keep looking forwards as well. So I will give you some background and history of the ISS Corporation. I think it has some interesting features. I will then speak about, in a complementary way to André, on ISS program cooperation features. I think they're very interesting, and we have had the fortune of some very bright people amongst the partnership who developed this cooperation. I will make some observations, draw some conclusions on the ISS cooperation, and then extrapolate that for future large-scale cooperation. Whereby, as we have heard over the past 2 days, that the ultimate objective of this large-scale cooperation, no doubt, is ultimately going to Mars. The scope and objectives of the ISS program, well, it hardly needs any words, but I would like to emphasize a few things. It concerns a civil international space station for peaceful purposes in accordance with international law. It concerns a multi-use facility, not only for scientific and technological purposes, but also for commercial use. I think this was also already at the time pretty forward-looking, that space would become an environment also for very interesting commercial activities. It is a long-term international cooperation. André emphasized this, indeed quite rightly, on the basis of genuine partnership. Whereby all partners provide contributions, flight elements, both flight elements and ground elements. with NASA having the lead for this program, for such a complex program, it's clear you do need a leader who assures the overall system engineering and integration. And what I also like to emphasize is that the space station was conceived right from the beginning as having an evolutionary character. And in the context of our meeting of the past 2 days, I just inserted up front an Annex 1. I don't want to bother you with all the text, but just quote to you that this is a quote from the ISS Memorandum of Understanding, one of the 4, but they're in this respect all identical, and this is the 1998 version, so the one in force today, which says in its that specifically the space station and its evolutionary additions could provide for a variety of capabilities. For example, I will only quote the last bullet, a staging base for possible future missions, such as a permanent lunar base, a human mission to Mars, robotic planetary probes, a human mission to survey the asteroids, and a scientific and communication facility in geosynchronous orbit. I think it's only the last one on which we haven't spoken over the past 2 days, but all the others we have spoken. So in that respect, there is nothing new under the sun. The space station was right from the beginning envisaged to evolve for such an activity. So by all means, my call to you all is, let's use it for that purpose as well. Now just a little bit of history. I think some people forget, but it was in the very year of the Apollo 11 landing that it was a NASA invitation to Europe, Canada and Japan for participation in the so-called post-Apollo program, which was supposed to include an orbiting space station and a space shuttle. Now, the space shuttle was put up front for good reasons, and already in 1973, Europe and Canada decided, not Japan, to participate in the shuttle program, which resulted in, for Europe, a very interesting, successful and important space lab program. And you all know, of course, also what it meant for the Canadians with their remote manipulator system. 1983, the first space lab mission, which demonstrated the acquisition of Europe for the first time to develop human-rated space flight hardware. Then, already the year after, so it's interesting, in the year of the first Apollo landing, the invitation came from NASA to participate in the space shuttle program. After the first space lab flight, the year after, President Reagan directed NASA to develop a permanently manned station and invited the friends and allies of the United States to participate in this endeavor. The next year already, some first MOUs were signed concerning the Phase B of space station cooperation. But more importantly, in 1988, the first generation IGA and MOUs were signed for the design, development, operation and utilization phases of the space station, 1988. Then, I forget about the different redesigns, but 1993 was another milestone whereby the existing space station partners invited Russia to join the International Space Station. And in 1998, the ultimate agreements, the updated IGA and MOUs, were signed as we know them today and as they are in force today. 1998 was equally important because finally it saw the launch of the first hardware elements, Zarya and Unity. Now, in 2000, the permanent crew started to occupy the space station with Expedition 1. And I make a jump then that most probably in 2013, the assembly will be complete, at least in my definition, with the expected Russian launch of their laboratory, the multi-purpose laboratory module, with, for Europe, very important, the European robotic arm, which is developed since quite a couple of years, but is waiting launch and supposed to be launched together with this Russian module. On purpose, and André has already said it, I've put no bullet on any lifetime extension decisions of ISS, because André already said it very well. The Space Station Cooperation, open-ended cooperation, and I must say I've been always quite surprised about the attention and emphasis amongst negotiations over the past, in negotiations over the past year, which have been devoted to whether or not the station should be extended, station cooperation, apart from, of course, from technical considerations. But politically speaking, by all means, the ISS cooperation is an open-ended cooperation without an end date, and even stronger, as I already quoted, the IGA foresees in space station cooperation having an evolutionary character. Okay, also some nice pictures. December 1998, March 2011, with you see at one end of the forward end the ATV being connected to the space station, one of the European contributions. And just let me use this, these two pictures to once again emphasize 1984 Reagan, President Reagan invitation to develop the space station. 1998, the first hardware elements. 2013, probably the assembly complete. It spans a period of 30 years. We have to, I think, to keep this in mind for future endeavors, whereby, as I think became very clear over the past 2 days, that developing such a complex, by all means complex structure in low Earth orbit is nothing as compared to foreseeing a human mission to Mars from a technical and organizational point of view. Just some statistics today, very briefly. Crew of 6, and a picture of the present expedition crew, Expedition 30. Of course, I use this picture because I'm very proud to see my own countryman and friend, good friend, André Kuipers, amongst the crew operating today the space station. Now, some ISS cooperation features. I think by all means, and it cannot be emphasized enough and can be publicized enough, that the ISS program is really a major technical success. It is an unprecedented multinational technological program cooperation. It's the largest, by all means, largest cooperation in the world in this respect. The ISS is very visible, and it also showed quite a solid robustness vis-à-vis several crisis situations which are unavoidable to come in over such a long period. But indeed, there have been major programmatic problems. We should not close our eyes for that. The program saw considerable program delays. If you realize that the initial optimistic assumption was to have the assembly complete in 1994, and as I said, we hope to see it in 2013. Costs have dramatically increased, and the station of today is quite different from what it was envisaged originally. Now, the ISS for sure is a benchmark for international cooperation in space, but the justified question is, can it be a model for future cooperation in space exploration at a global level, whereby we will see even more participating countries? I jumped the first couple of bullets because they basically repeat what was said before. Let me go to the fourth bullet, which is that there's this three-tier cooperation structure. André mentioned it. The first tier is the IGA. The second are the largely identical MOUs between, as a sort of a hub and spoke construction, the NASA in the hub and the spokes pointing to the different partners. And then last but not least, and this has been an important part of my activities, the bilateral implementing arrangements, of which there have been not too many under that denominator of implementing arrangement. There have been much more so-called letters of agreement on all kinds of utilization issues. But I used for the first time, I think here, the notion of barter arrangements, the bilateral implementing arrangement, by and large barter arrangements, which meant, and there I like to be a bit chauvinistic, that most of the pressurized modules of the non-Russian part of the space station were built in Europe. It was already mentioned to a speaker this morning from Alenia, rightly so. I think Europe can be mighty proud on the engineering knowledge and engineering excellence which we developed in building pressurized models, starting with the Space Lab module. And if you realize that Columbus, Node 2, Node 3, Cupola, and also the multi-purpose pressurized module, the latest edition, which is a derivative from the MPLM, are all European built, but not only that, one of the commercial resupply vehicles, the Cygnus vehicle developed by Orbital for the commercial resupply services, the pressurized model is a straight derivative from the pressurized modules developed for the space station. So Europe is present on the station well beyond its basic participation, thanks to these arrangement possibilities. Now, the general structure of the cooperation, to complement what Andrea said, is basically you have the partners contribute user elements, the US Lab, Columbus, GEM, infrastructure elements like the service module, the functional cargo block, connecting modules, airlocks, etc. Other flight elements, vehicles to supply and reboost the space station, and space station's unique ground elements. Now, the partners receive in return for that utilization rights, including the accommodation of their payloads, system resources to really make use of these utilization rights, like power, heat rejection, crew time, and the right for flight opportunities for their astronauts in the different expeditions. But also, so the partners who provide user elements, they retain their user accommodation except for an allocation to other partners to compensate those partners for the infrastructure elements which they have provided and which enable these user elements to operate. Now, as was said, Roscosmos is a bit of a self-standing entity in this, that it retains 100%, but also it provides all the resources it requires to operate their own elements. NASA keeps by and large the largest part of their laboratory facility, because NASA in addition provides a lot of infrastructure elements. And to compensate for that, ESA and Japan, they keep 51.1% of their laboratories and attribute the remainder space and capabilities to NASA and CSA, who gets from all the partners a small percentage in compensation for having developed the robotic armor, the mobile servicing center. Now, also the partners share common operations, common system operations cost on the basis of an agreed percentage, which is listed in my slide. And again, Russia is self-sustaining, that it covers all its own operation cost and keeps also all of the utilization resources. Each of the partners are independently responsible for the launch operation and maintenance of the elements they provide, be it user elements, be it infrastructure elements. And that includes also the servicing and the spares and all what is required to keep it in an operational state. Last but not least, some details that during the construction phase, NASA and Roscosmos started to have utilization and crew rights when their first elements got on orbit. In the case of ESA and Japan, it was when their user elements were assembled and commissioned on orbit, they started to have rights and obligations, and there was some more flexible arrangement for Canada. Now, some observations and conclusions. These are observations and conclusions from the present ISS program cooperation, and I think it's very important that they are being used and recalled as a basis for future endeavors for international human missions beyond LEO and eventually to Mars. I will list here a few. There was this extremely long duration of the program before assembly complete, as I said, approximately 30 years. It is a challenge to maintain, to sustain political support over such a long time across, obviously, many government periods. It also saw as a consequence some change of programmatic priorities, where it was originally conceived by and large as a microgravity research infrastructure in low Earth orbit. At some point in time, particularly inspired by NASA, there was sort of a redirection of focus for exploration. I would call it a bit a jump ahead. And due to this long period, technical solutions and pillars became obsolete. And the most explicit example was, of course, the retirement of the space shuttle. Now, the space station is a program of impressive size. It consumes, across the partnership, a large fraction of national space budgets. It is highly visible for public and political decision makers, and this requires very good and solid arguments for a long-lasting program priority insofar as it concerns financial funding. We should look at a specific setup of the cooperation scheme. André already mentioned it. There's the clear dominance and leadership for good reasons. Let me emphasize this by initially one and later two partners, the US and Russia, with corresponding influence, positive and negative, on program evolution. The contributions of the other partners were welcome but not essential. And the contribution of other partners, and that's also important to emphasize, were really dependent on the contribution of the lead partners. It's fair to say, and we have to keep this in mind, but this is not uncommon in these challenging, complex technical programs, that there was quite a considerable underestimation of the technical challenges, both in absolute terms as well as the challenges as a result of this cooperation. We also saw actually on both NASA and Russian side that the cost increases necessitated station capability deletions, which were in some cases not without serious consequences. The habitation module, probably everybody has forgotten about it, it was a NASA element, was deleted. Crew rescue vehicle, the NASA supposed to be developed crew rescue vehicle was deleted, which necessitated, by the way, now the present staffing of the station by 6 astronauts instead of the originally envisaged 7 astronauts. And I should like to recall this, it was already said before, also a very impressive centrifuge accommodation module, virtually completed by the Japanese colleagues as a barter element, was deleted, but I'm happy to hear that more and more one sees the value of such a facility, so maybe it will be resurrected in the near future. It led to program delays and to reduce program ambitions, and this in particular for the US science side. The program delays also exposed the program to a changing context, positive and negative in this case. The changed geopolitical environment over this long period allowed the extension of the partnership to Russia, already mentioned, which by all means, as we have noticed over the years, increased the program robustness. The new priority for exploration and an impact on the rationale and the funding priority for ISS and ISS utilization strategies. This is not to be underestimated either. And as I already said, the retirement of the space shuttle required an important modification on the logistic and utilization scenario, also for what concerns the stay of crew on board, instead of, which is now 6 months instead of 3 months. Important change for the utilization. And the reduced ambitions and the prolonged ISS assembly period put a heavy strain on the user community. They had to wait much longer because during the assembly phase, the extended assembly phase, most of the crew resources had to be focused on assembly rather than on utilization until we got finally 6 crew on board, and that had a very negative impact on the political support. The ISS, however, is an excellent example, an unprecedented example, how different management cultures can successfully interact. This was not from one day to the other. It had to be developed, but I think what has been achieved is quite impressive and a credit for everybody involved, and I think it is a unique basis for future endeavors, and I think it is an essential basis for future endeavor. What I cannot be emphasized enough either was that the robustness of the cooperation was really thanks to the fact that the cooperation is based on an international treaty. International treaties you cannot break easily. On the contrary, if you break an international treaty, you have a high-level political crisis. And thanks to the IGA, I think we had the crisis in the program, but the crises were all survivable as we know today. Extremely important is the redundancy for key technical solution and pillars. The most clear example, of course, is Shuttle and Soyuz for crew transport. When the shuttle was retired, the Soyuz could take over. On the other side, with the retirement of the shuttle, the station lost a major capability, a major download capability, which only will be restored hopefully near future when the Dragon capsule, one of the vehicles for the commercial reply services, will start flying, and which has a reasonable download capability. So by all means, the framework of the cooperation is robust, but the foundation, if I may say so, from a European perspective is, and weak is probably a too strong word, but certainly somewhat weak because of the fact that the cooperation is really based on dependency rather than interdependency, as I indicated earlier. On the barter side, we felt on the European side in particular that it proved to be a very good tool for the cooperation. However, it has also its downside that at least was the European experience, that advanced delivery of hardware most often was an advanced delivery of hardware developed by Europe against services from which Europe was supposed to benefit. I quote one somewhat, let me say, bitter example, but we all survived it, is that this was actually before the original space station cooperation agreements were signed, but all the intentions were decided to participate on the European side, is that Europe built some utilization enhancement items, some facilities which are still very much in use on board of the station, like the microgravity glove box, like a series of freezers. And in return for that, Europe would get early utilization opportunities before Columbus was supposed to be assembled on orbit and commissioned. Now, due to all the delays, the eventual so-called early utilization only materialized when Columbus was commissioned on orbit. I mean, it was technically unavoidable, but in the end of the day, of course, the value of Europe having been building these early utilization enhancement items got somewhat lost, and this is just one example. Another point to be kept in mind is public enthusiasm about ISS, I think generally is low, and it's regrettably low. And most importantly, in Europe, ISS is still rather seen as a US program. Astronaut flights raise high publicity, however, mainly in the country of the astronaut origin. The glamour of human spaceflight is in that respect somewhat over. And what I think is also regrettable is that there is really no large or no strong significant community of stakeholders outside the space sector. This has always been one of my hobby horses, so to say, that we have built a space station, we have built a fantastic research facility in orbit, but that research facility to some extent was for the space community, to test new space technology, etc., but to a larger extent it was intended as a research laboratory for, call it, the industrial and research community, which is not necessarily in the space arena. On the contrary, it's somewhere else. It's the biological community, it's the material sciences community, it's the physics science, fluid science community, and we, I think, at least looking from the European perspective, we have really not been able, if I may call it like that, to market, to sell the capabilities to those communities. In many respects, those communities are really not aware of the unique capabilities. And I think there is an enormous challenge now that the space station is fully operational, fully capable, and smoothly running to fill that gap, in my opinion. Coming to the last bullet on this slide, I have to say it, we were really rather hampered by and I know we not only also in the United States itself, by the US export control regime, which was really a problem for the cooperation. It hampered exchange of information and services, and it delayed and complicated the implementation of the cooperation. Now, obviously, it's one thing to identify the problems, but another is to look for solutions, and particularly solutions in the case of upcoming large-scale new cooperations. Many of the issues and solutions, they on the one hand obvious, but it's good, I think, to keep them in focus, and I've heard, much to my satisfaction, many of the, let's say, the solutions already in the course of the past 2 days. Go in sizable steps. And this was, I think, said in many presentations yesterday and today. Also, do not fix only one mission objective. Assure that in these sizable steps that they each in itself have a justification and an objective. Make sure, again, pretty obvious, assure this broad basis of stakeholders and entertain them as such. And above all, provide for redundancy in technical and operational key functions. Now, how to maintain the political and public interest and support over such a long program lifetime? If the station already took 30 years to develop and come to completion, how long we have to think in terms of a Mars endeavor? So again, we have to follow an evolutionary approach. Make absolutely sure that past investments are not lost, and more specifically, integrate the ISS really very explicitly in the exploration scenario. I think it's killing to abandon the ISS for the sake of starting a new large-scale exploration endeavor. I think it's killing for the exploration endeavor. Again, I repeat the broad basis of stakeholders. On the architecture of the cooperation, we should rather specifically think about a system of systems approach, or eventually a consequent interdependency approach. But personally, I believe stronger in a system of systems approach, particularly with an enlarged cooperation as is envisaged today. How to deal with the interaction of different management cultures? Well, I think, as I said already before, we have learned enormously from the ISS experience. And I think, and also with the interesting analysis which Walter Peters presented this morning, in which, having been involved in years of negotiation with all the different partners, I think there is a lot of truth in his diagram. I think we have learned that, we have appreciated that, and we have established, above all, I think, very trustfully relationships amongst the partnership. I think that is a very, very valuable experience, and I'm sure that if that experience, if one capitalizes on that experience, I'm pretty confident on any future large-scale cooperation. Of course, it's important in such cooperation to have meaningful interfaces, and just to mention one, I think it's extremely good that the discussions are already ongoing for a long time to develop a standard docking interface. I think docking is a key element in any large-scale, future large-scale undertaking, and I think one is well on the way on this. And well, to take the export control as a reference, I think one better identifies and tries to identify as good as possible any of such kind of obstacles in good time before entering in new complex cooperation arrangements, and identify solutions and eventually remedies for that kind of problems well ahead of time. That is basically what I wanted to say. There was one thing this morning what was said is how to catch public and political attention. I'm always surprised how few people are aware that you can follow 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, thanks to NASA TV, what's happening on board on the space station. You see sometimes the most fantastic and inspiring images, and I think we really have to give wider publicity to the fact that that space station is really visible to everybody all the time. Thank you very much. I will flip through this and finish this.
Thank you, Robert. And the third and last speaker for this session is Cathy Laurini. And as you know, Cathy is a senior advisor, exploration and space operations for NASA. She has a 20-year experience in the ISS program office, including leadership roles in utilization and operations preparation, system engineering, international vehicle integration. She has been 10 years at ESTEC. She's working from ESTEC, and she's also she had a leadership role in payload integration and real-time operation management. She's currently engaged in preparing for the international missions to explore the solar system, building on the ISS and its achievements. Please, Cathy. Thank you.
Thanks, André. I'm going to give you the technical perspective on the topic at hand, and I was going to start out with the joke on how the lawyers and the negotiators leave the engineer the crumbs in terms of time remaining to present. But in fact, as you've heard, the topic of governance of ISS and the significance of the agreements that enable the achievements that we've all talked about, they're really, they've stood the test of time, the work of André and Robert and their colleagues across the partnership. And so it's only fair that I try to summarize the meager technical challenges in a short period of time. But before I do, and I don't want to forget, and thanks to Kirk for the reminder, this evening at 9:33, the space station will fly over, and it looks like the weather is really going to cooperate with us today. And the pass is a wonderful one. It's a 70-degree elevation, so it'll be a long pass, estimated at about 6 minutes, and it will go from west-southwest to east-northeast. Don't ask me to tell you which way that is, but you guys are rocket scientists, so you'll figure it out. Okay, so now the technical perspective. As you've heard over the last couple of days, the space station is the first multinational cooperative effort of this magnitude that's ever been accomplished, and it's been stable over decades, and it's been stable, the partnership, the achievement, through political crises and technical crises, and I'll take just a second to mention that because it will set up some of the remarks that I want to make. But you've heard a little bit about some of the political crises, whether they're changes of administrations in the United States or budget-driven crises or ministerial crises. Back years ago, there was a European ministerial crisis that caused us to react. So things happen, and the partnership has weathered these kinds of occurrences. And technical crises such as the tragic Columbia space shuttle accident. I mean, we've endured technical challenges, technical crises, and managed to emerge a stronger partnership through those. And I think it's important to note because what the space station has shown us is that it's possible to bring agencies together in a complex technical endeavor, and it's possible for it to last over decades. So what we dream of in these increasingly complex missions, exploration missions, are feasible to address. And I think again the space station complexity is clear, and this fact. The fact that the IGA and the MOU, the agreements have remained, the governance model, the governance aspects have remained stable over time, is in itself enough evidence that we ought to base whatever we do going forward on the agreements that have been put in place on ISS. And I'm not saying renegotiate and add new partners. I'm just saying there's a really solid foundation there, and we need to build on it. And I trust that the people involved will be able to find a pragmatic way through it. So what you've heard from the previous speakers is that policymakers and lawyers and negotiators, they consider a lot of complex topics like rights and obligations and in the governance and legal aspects and jurisdiction and all this stuff. As engineers, the important things for us in a governance model are really things like, decision making. How are decisions going to get made? What processes are we going to use? How are we going to control our activities and implement our activities in an effective way? I think and those are the things that I want to talk about. I think that there's much of what we have done on space station that is good and it works. I think, as Robert said, the idea of having a strong lead agency that's able to integrate and take responsibility for the system aspects has been a very positive aspect of our partnership, and it's something those of you that have been involved in implementing some complex technical activity know that someone has to be responsible for the system engineering. I think that's been proven as a positive step. And I think there's some things that we've done that we can and that we will improve on. Lessons learned, if you will. things like interface definition. You know, we did some things in the beginning of the program that complicated. I'm speaking from a NASA perspective now. Complicated the lives of our partners. For example, in defining interfaces, we tried to define and fix a set of interfaces between the U.S. segment and a Columbus module long before we were really ready to do it. And we tried to negotiate those interfaces with people on our side of the interface that didn't even own the interface. So we would end up a lot of times with an agreement on an interface document that, in fact, you know, was doomed to fail because it was too early and it was not even negotiated by the people that control our side of the interface. So we learned from those kinds of things, and as we matured in the execution of the program, we got better and we did it better. But that's an example of things that we will learn from and we will improve as we go forward, and it's not worth really focusing on. But I think I'll take this opportunity to talk about three things that I think are related to the idea of governance. They've each been discussed by the previous speakers, but I want to talk a little bit about make some technical points. And the first one is interdependency. The idea of the critical path and the relationship. The degree to which partners rely on each other for success of the program, for success of the endeavor. And on Space Station, we had a situation where, to a large extent, partners provided specific systems or elements, and we tried very hard to meet at the interface, to find as simple of enough interface as we could, and let the other partner do what needed to be done to engineer their side of the interface. And it's hard to argue with that being a good approach in a complex technical system. However, if you look forward to missions to Mars and you think about the elements, the capabilities that we're going to need in going to Mars. We're going to need to launch the crew off the surface of the Earth. We're going to need to rendezvous at a staging location with some other elements that will make the journey with us. We're going to need to keep the crew alive for 6 months as we get to Mars. We're going to need to land on Mars. We're going to need systems to keep the crew alive on Mars and move large distances on Mars, because that's going to be the value-added exploration approach. We're going to need to get crew off the surface of Mars. We're going to need to get crew back, and we're going to need to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. When you take a look at all those pieces and you try to break it up at the element level, you see that 5 or 6 countries are going to need to master reliable, highly efficient life support systems, or reliable, effective communication systems. And when you look at the amount of money we have today, it seems that there's probably not enough to go around. So we need to if we're going to be interdependent, we've all talked about these missions being international missions. They will include a broad set of nations, but we need to be smart about, I think, how we decide who will provide what at the subsystem level, because we will be dependent on each other to do the mission. So we might as well accept that that in order to be able to forward these missions, we're going to need to be dependent on each other at a lower level, and probably at a sub-element level. And I think that's something we're perfectly capable of doing when I see the relationships that we've built on Space Station and the trust. And I see things like the ISS, the nodes that the Italians have built, and how successful efforts like that have been. We can do it, and I think we must. Dissimilar redundancy. I think I mentioned the Columbia accident. The space station survived because of the Russian transportation systems during this couple-year period between when the shuttle was not flying. And a key lesson learned we take away is the partnership is much more robust because we have multiple ways to get cargo. Right now we have multiple ways to get cargo to the space station, and before too long we will have multiple ways to get crew to the space station. It's clear those dissimilar redundant capabilities bring a robustness. But when you look at, say, lunar exploration, and you talk about getting crew to the surface of Mars, or to the surface of the Moon, the cost of the transportation system is probably 95% of the costs of exploring the Moon. So can we really afford, as a partnership, the costs of a dissimilarly redundant transportation system, getting the crew on and off the surface of the Moon? probably not. We looked at it in the constellation days, and we found that it was it would certainly add robustness. It would be great, but it was something we probably couldn't afford as a group. And that's something, another thing to keep in mind. And lastly, I'll talk about this issue of different cultures and management cultures. A lot has been said, and I won't harp on it, on the differences of how hierarchy plays into it, and customs, individual customs play into the management and the decision-making cultures of each partner. And a lot has already been said about how, over the course of the partnership, the trust and the relationships and the ability to work together and overcome these differences and find ways, very effective ways to work in light of these differences, have been developed. And there's no question that that this is one of the major successes of the programs. And I will say, when I look at the work we're doing within the ISEG to plan for exploration, as has been said, there's a broader set of nations at the table. And it's clear that the agencies participating in space station, they understand each other. They communicate a lot easier. They, when we say, oh, we need to do this, they know, everybody knows what we're talking about. And a non-partner like the South Koreans, for example, they will say, okay, now tell me again what this action item list is all about. So there's a familiarity that exists with the current partnership that's very effective in planning the next step. And I think if we, as Maria said earlier, when we go to the moon, when we go to asteroids, when we go to Mars, we're going to do it with a broader set of nations than is just participating in ISS. It's the right thing. It's essential. They bring capabilities. They bring resources. It's about humankind, and there will be a broader set of agencies. But I think it's incumbent on us in the Space Station Partnership to think about how we can create opportunities for building that trust and those relationships with the new partners before we get to the point of really sending the first crew here or first crew there. So that's another thing that I think perhaps ISS can do, is let's find some trust building, some relationship building, interim partnerships as an incremental step to getting a broader set of nations to the point where we are all with the management cultures that make us so effective. Okay, so lastly, and to leave a little bit of time for questions, I think that I wouldn't be a practicing engineer with a logical, pragmatic brain like we talked about earlier. All Kirk introduced the topic without saying, it's good to talk about the governance model, the ISS agreements, and the role they can play in exploration. But I think it's really important to figure out what we want to do, and then let's figure out how we're going to manage it, how we're going to govern it, what kind of agreements we need, and that's a lot of what we're doing. We're building on the genuine partnership. We're taking it one step even further, and we're collaboratively planning for the next step, and collaboratively planning what we can do that's technically feasible, programmatically implementable. And then once we have an idea, then I'm sure the experts can get the most effective agreements and governance models to help us be successful. So thank you.
Hi there, my name's Ben Wilcock. I'm an ISU master student. Sorry, up here. I've actually been working on a team project that's looking, and my section was law, and I was looking at the ISS, and we're doing a space project called a Solar Shield. So we were looking at international collaborations and how they might work. And as case studies, I was using the ISS, CERN, the nuclear thermal power plant in the south of France, and ITU. And we were looking at how you could implement this in a much larger international project. And I was wondering, if you thought taking a lead agency is the best option, because what we were looking at is taking an example of the ITU and perhaps creating an external agency to have a more, and we were kind of morphing what's taken in the IGA, so using an IGA, but instead of having bilateral MOUs, having multilateral MOUs. And I was wondering if you thought that would be a better model, or if you think the lead agency is the best model.
I think, as I mentioned, I think my personal feeling is having a lead agency that leads in a true, genuine partnership manner is important when there's high risk, highly complex technical questions at hand, and that spans a long duration of time. I think there's an expertise and a skill set and a mechanism that you build up that makes it more efficient, more cost effective to implement for everybody, I think, to implement it over time. I think could you do it otherwise? I think there's probably examples where it has been, but you pay a price in terms of efficiency, and there's very little margin for error in a lot of what we do. So we're trying to do things, do a lot of things with a reasonable amount of money. So we need to think about that. And so my perspective is it's more cost efficient and more and wiser to have a lead agency. But I realize that it may come across as somewhat of a conflict of interest here.
Well, let me. Basically, I have the same opinion as Kathy. I think I heard you saying, as an alternative, creating a dedicated agency, and did you quote ITU? Yeah, as an example. Apart from ITU, on which I could make a serious joke, that I think they have run into quite some severe trouble as an organization in attributing the rules for geostationary rights. So a dedicated organization itself is not a guarantee for solving problems. But apart from that, we have some experience, of course, in ESA as basically a dedicated organization to develop rather complex European space programs. And even where there is a dedicated agency which is in charge, one should not have any illusions that within such a dedicated agency, the participating countries are not all equal, depending on how much they contribute. There is still that influence. Now, there may be the agency acts as a single body with technical responsibility, but nevertheless, also there sometimes, or quite often, the technical solutions are driven by the most important stakeholders. So, from that point of view, in each case, the agency solution doesn't make a hell of a lot of difference with a setup like the space station.
I think we all conclude that there's a need for a leader when there is a project which requires a certain amount of integration and all that kind of thing. Now, is the leader a state or a state organization or an international organization? But as Robert said, personally, you can try to model both ITAR, not the ITAR, but in the south of France for what they are building now, for the next generation electricity plant. But I want to emphasize what Robert said. For the space station, there's a leader in the international organization, which is Germany, because Germany pays 40% of the European contribution. The three main contributors pay 85% of the contribution, meaning that the 7 others pay 15%. So, and since there's a rule of return of industrial contracts, obviously where the contracts go, where the money goes, is important. So that's also something you have to look at. International organization, I just recalled earlier that now also we have to think about the European Union. So instead of having one organization, sometimes you may have two organizations representing one party plus a number of states beyond, either 26 or 19 in ESA. So I think for the future programs, we will have a complex issue, at least in Europe, to address, before we are able to even invent who will represent Europe in a new project.
I can't resist. I heard two suggestions on the organization of this effort that were both cogent and stimulating, and that to me conjured up very different pictures of what was going to happen. I heard Robert suggest taking a system of systems approach, and then I heard Kathy talking about organizing this not on an element basis, but basically on a functional basis within the elements, so that you concentrate the spending and the expertise in particular areas and avoid redundancies. To me, those conjured up very different pictures of what was going to happen and sounded like a conflict. So I'd like to hear whether that was just the way I was hearing it, or whether there really were two different pictures here, and what the thoughts are on those perspectives.
Actually, I should have been maybe somewhat more careful in what I was saying, that both approaches, system of systems and interdependence, can coexist, so to say. If I take the today's space station situation, we have, to some extent, in some elements, a system of system approach. If I take on the European side the ATV, by all means, I think that is a system in itself, which Europe contributes. Yeah, it's been developed more or less autonomous, but assuring with the lead partner that the interfaces are okay. But if you look inside the ATV, there's a very strong interdependence, because we have a Russian docking system, and I had the privilege of negotiating with our Russian friends the cooperation to make the ATV work, for which, of course, the docking system was an essential element. So there you have a clear interdependence. So I think maybe, again, I repeat, I should have been maybe be somewhat more careful in that. I think the two can and probably have, also for the reasons Kathy said, for economic reasons, have to coexist together also in the future.
I can only agree.
Thank you. So no more questions. Thank you very much for supporting our presentations. Thank you.
We'll stick him right. We'll stick him under the screen. All right, now time for our last speaker, and hopefully technology succeeds in this case. But before we introduce our last speaker, Franklin Chang Diaz, who will be live from, I believe, Costa Rica today, I would like to take the last opportunity to thank our sponsors. Of course, I want to thank the staff, students, and our volunteers here at ISU. Once again, it was a pleasure to work with you all. We could not have done this without you, so thank you very much. Of course, thank you for the help NASA's provided, our gold sponsor Boeing, bronze and tote bag sponsor Astrium, coffee break sponsor Aerojet, our friend sponsor American Astronautical Society, our media sponsor spacetoday.net, and our nonprofit sponsors, the British Interplanetary Society, National Space Society, and Women in Aerospace Europe. So thank you very much to all of our sponsors. All right, for our last speaker. Many of you know Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz. Franklin, dual citizenship of the United States and Costa Rica. He got a PhD from MIT in plasma physics. He has an impressive 25-year career at NASA with a record 7 spaceflight missions. During this time period, he actually worked on Veldhuyzen, the propulsion system he now works at, his company that he founded, Ad Astra Rocket Company, that he founded and is president and CEO of. He's promoted science and technology throughout Latin America, which resulted in the first Space Conference of the Americas, which was sponsored by Colombia. He helped form the Chagas Space Project, a collaboration of 5 countries to study the Chagas disease in microgravity of space. And his biography goes on and on and on. I recommend that you read it. He's lived an amazing life. So, ladies and gentlemen, Franklin Chang Diaz.
Can you all hear me well? Can anybody respond?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Also, I need to take control of the WebEx link so I can bring up share my desktop. So if you could transfer, I don't know if you know how to do that. Just need the presenter. There you go. That's it. Thank you. And then I'm going to go ahead and share this desktop and make sure that you all can see my screen. Should be coming up. So there it is. Okay. Trying to find the icon that gives me the full screen. Well, can you all see the chart that you have that I have on my screen? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, very good. I think we are in good shape, and I appreciate the time that you're offering me to talk a little bit about our company and about our Bessemer engine and the progress. And I apologize for not being able to be with you physically, but I think this medium seems to be working pretty well. So let me just go ahead and press ahead so that we can move through these things fairly quickly. I was hoping to give you a rundown through the company and the technology. Of course, the technology that we're focused today will be the Bessemer engine. Speak a little bit about the relationship we've had with NASA from the get-go of this company, how we plan to fly or road to space, and then a few comments on the market, the business, the way we see it. I know that ISU is interested in this sort of commercial and market-driven technology. So let me press ahead with a discussion on the company. So this chart essentially shows the company that we are, a fairly high technology company, but we are not only focused on the development of Bessemer. That's an important thing, that it is the bulk of our work. You can see this in the top panel. We do focus on the development of the engine. However, we have been diversifying the company into the field of energy as well, and we have projects right now going on in Costa Rica on energy research, particularly on the hydrogen cycle, working together with the Costa Rican oil refinery, which is interested in moving into renewable energy, and power generation with the company Cummins and Earth University, a research Agricultural University in Costa Rica. So this work is going on right now. We're also doing a little bit of work in the field of environment, particularly in the area of toxic waste disintegration used in plasma technologies, and a number of other areas in applied physics, mainly plasma physics, but we border into other areas as well, not just plasma physics. The company is fairly young. The company was established as a U.S. corporation. It's incorporated in Delaware. And we became operational as a result of an agreement with NASA, which transferred the old Advanced Space Propulsion Laboratory that was part of the Johnson Space Center in Houston to the new company. The company only existed on paper, so this gave it actual body and infrastructure, and all of the personnel was then hired by the company. Very quickly after the company became operational, we received our first sizable private investment. And this was part of the strategies to move out of the government, so that we could then move to capture a private investment. A year later, after the company was established, then NASA granted exclusive license to the Vasmer patents, which there were 3 of them. Now there are 2 that are active at the present time. They will expire sometime in 2019, if I remember correctly. We also inaugurated a subsidiary in Costa Rica. We're located in the northwest of the country. Very small facility, very beautiful surroundings, and a really nice place to do research in plasma. And it's interesting, the phenomenon that's taking place in the world now, that is thanks to the ability to communicate. The internet has allowed research to be possible pretty much anywhere on the planet. So we have chosen this nice setting here. We also moved in 2007 to structure our financial infrastructure to make it more robust. When we came out of NASA, we're basically a bunch of rocket scientists and with not much knowledge in the world of finances and raising capital and all of these things we've had to learn thanks to the activities and the work, the help of Aldesa Investment Banking. Is a facility, an operation in Costa Rica, which has done a lot of advanced developments in the country. So we're very fortunate to have their support. And then in September, we moved into a new realm in Costa Rica. We have now entered the public market. So we are trading our stock in the Costa Rican Stock Exchange under a restricted public offering, which is a new designation the country has created in order to allow high-risk companies to publicly trade in the stock exchange. What it means is that it is restricted to only sophisticated investors that have the means to embark in high-risk operations. So the company is essentially a holding company. Ad Astra Rocket, it is, like I said, a U.S. company, but it has branches, and the branch in Costa Rica is a wholly owned subsidiary, Ad Astra Rocket Costa Rica. We also have 2 other companies that are connected in the environmental area, Ad Astra Energy and Environmental Services in the United States and Ad Astra Energy and Environmental Services in Costa Rica. So that's basically the structure of the company and how it's come to be what it is today. We have a board of directors, 6 of us. 3 of us are from the scientific world. We're basically scientists, PhDs. Jared is from MIT. Most of us, many of us, are essentially trained in the thermonuclear fusion effort area. So we come at it as rockets from the high power plasma research that's going on worldwide. And Jared was working on the D3, the tokamak, at the General Atomics Corporation in San Diego before he joined our program about 18 years ago. And Tim Glover, physicist from Rice University, also plasma physicist. We have an attorney, Rob Singer, who was a guy who essentially helped us transition from NASA, and two seasoned space managers of great experience. One of them, Mr. George Abbey, who was the director of the Johnson Space Center for many years, and Ed Muñiz, who is the owner and founder of MEI Technologies, another fairly large aerospace company in Houston. We're located, as I mentioned, in Houston, Texas, and Liberia, Costa Rica. We have a small operation, small facility, just basically a representation in Europe, in Frankfurt. The facilities in Houston are much larger, about 25,000 square feet of floor space. We have one of the largest chambers, vacuum chambers in the area, probably in the United States. And our facility in Costa Rica is a smaller facility, but brand new. It was specially made for this purpose. And we have a fully equipped laboratory with a high-power plasma source, which simulates the conditions of Bessemer for long-duration testing and materials research. We have two teams. The team in Costa Rica is very young. The team in Houston, it is also young, but not as young as the one in Costa Rica. The average age in our facility in Costa Rica is about 26 years old. So this is nice because we are, of course, looking to the future. So a little bit about the technology. Obviously, what we're interested in is in electric propulsion. We are interested in high-power electric propulsion to make it different from the conventional chemical rocket, which uses a lot of propellant. The electric rocket uses a lot less propellant, simply because the temperature of the, in essence, the temperature of the exhaust, which is equivalent to the velocity of the exhaust, is much higher. So here we're dealing with plasma. Here we're dealing with chemical combustion, and the temperatures are completely different. Here we're talking about temperatures of a couple of million degrees, and here we're talking temperatures of a few thousand degrees. So very different in the operation and completely different technologies. Obviously, we need electricity to make the rocket work. There is no chemical combustion going on, so we need access to power. And power in space is a very, very important element in any robust exploration program. So we deal with plasmas. Just to run through very quickly, what plasma is. It's a superheated gas made out of charged particles. We call it the fourth state of matter. It's about 99% of what we see in the sky. And it can be controlled with very strong magnetic fields, which is the most important feature that we take advantage of. Of course, plasmas are used in many areas of environment, industry, and of course, we're interested in propulsion. So how does this thing work? You can envision a superconducting magnetic bottle, essentially, a superconducting magnet, which produces essentially a tube, an envelope, a holding a tube, which is then able to hold a very hot plasma, which we create by means of electromagnetic waves. We have actually two stages. First stage here, where the plasma is created, and second stage here, where the plasma is energized and accelerated. Both of these processes are by means of electromagnetic radio waves, electromagnetic radiation. we start with a gas. In our case, we have been working with argon gas, although we have been also doing experiments with hydrogen, helium, and krypton. We're starting a campaign with krypton in the next few weeks. And the gas is ionized simply by the action of the electromagnetic radiation in the presence of the magnetic field. This is called a helicon plasma source, very well known, behaved, and this is a very high power device. We start out here with about 30 kilowatts power, and then as soon as the plasma is created, essentially it becomes a cold plasma, and a cold plasma for us is something on the order of 40 to 50,000 degrees. Of course, as soon as that happens, the plasma latches onto the magnetic field, and it no longer has contact with physical surfaces or surrounding structures. So the surrounding structures do get hot. The temperatures of those structures don't surpass the 1,000 degrees or so. We are, of course, using very tough materials, ceramics for the most part, as the first plasma-facing wall on the inside of the rocket. As soon as the plasma moves into the second stage, we inject additional power. This is where the bulk of the power goes in, about 70 kilowatts in this case. Sometimes we double that. We go up to 60 kilowatts of initial power in the first stage, up to 140 kilowatts here to get over to the 200 kilowatt capability. And then the plasma energizes and finds itself at the entrance of a magnetic nozzle. The expanding magnetic field then, by the conservation of the magnetic moment, allows the particles to line up and accelerate, and the particles develop a very high velocity, move out, and eventually detach from the nozzle at the beta equals 1 transition, what we call the alphane beta equals 1 detachment transition. It's about a couple of meters from the mouth or the throat of the nozzle. The plasma detaches by that process. It provides then momentum exchange, which then, of course, results in rocket thrust. This one also illustrates a little bit about the way the Bessemer is different from other electric rockets, in that the physics is fundamentally different. If you were to look at the typical electric rockets of today, such as the ion engine and the Hall thrusters, you can move them in or scale them in order of increasing power density. And this is kind of, if you were to look at a cross-section of the plasma, in all three cases, starting with the ion engine, you basically have no magnetic field, no magnetization. The plasma is free to move in all directions, and the power density that these electrostatic discharges can achieve is of the order of about 40 kilowatts per meter square. If you want to go to a higher power than that, you need to have some magnetization. In this case, electrons are magnetized to produce essentially a virtual grid, which accelerates the ions out of the chamber, and you get higher power density. You get to about maybe a factor of 10, 20 or so at about 200 kilowatts per square meter. And if you want to go still further, then you enter into the full magnetization condition, ion and electron magnetization, very typical of thermonuclear plasma discharges, very high density. Here the power density increases up to about 4 megawatts, 4,000 kilowatts per square meter. And this is the important feature of the Bessemer, is the ability to handle very large amounts of power in a fairly small package. So origins of this technology, of course, come from thermonuclear fusion back in the 1970s. Some of the early experiments in the 1980s at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Plasma Fusion Center. These are basically plasma mirror machines. It doesn't look anything like a rocket, but it is. These were the test beds where the physics was developed and understood. First patents were generated in 89, 2002 there was a refinement patent, which is the one that's active today. There was a change, a fundamental change in the second patent where we introduced the helicon as the plasma source at the front end of the rocket to make the entire system electrode-less, meaning there is no physical electrode embedded in the plasma. And this is one of the reasons the system can go to very high power density. We then transitioned in the early to mid 90s to the Advanced Space Propulsion Laboratory, which was created at the Johnson Space Center to continue this work, and we began to very strongly develop the controlling physics of the device with participation of many universities, national laboratories, and of course other NASA facilities. And we worked in this facility for about 10 years before then we transitioned into the private sector. So the last experiment we did at the Johnson Space Center was a very strong magnetic bottle using conventional magnets. These were copper magnets that are cooled by liquid nitrogen, but using a tremendous amount of power just to create a magnetic field. We never transitioned to the superconductors until we went into the private company. And the VX50 was a Vasimer experiment at 50 kilowatts. It was a fairly low power device. Nevertheless, we were able to show in that system our ability to efficiently produce the plasma, which was one of the open questions back in the early days. You know, how efficiently can you really ionize that plasma? And here, some of the data that was presented a long time ago. This is very old data, just as a historical context. You can see this is a chart of the plasma produced as a function of the neutral gas injected, and the 45-degree line indicated total burnout, meaning that every gas particle that was injected was actually converted into an ion. So everything was being ionized. Very important to be able to demonstrate this. And then in this bottom chart, which was the result of Tim Glover's PhD thesis, we were able to demonstrate that a plasma in the second stage could be accelerated by action of electromagnetic waves through the ion cyclotron resonance heating process. And you can see here that the population of ions moves to the right in velocity space as increasing amounts of power in the second stage were injected. You see here. This was a very low power experiment, but it formed the basis for the demonstration of the physics. We then moved into the private sector and began to build another experiment called the VX100, 100 kilowatts, and the guts of this experiment was all now began to resemble the working guts of a real rocket. And here again we found the plasma was able to be ionized with very high efficiency, very low ionization cost. This is some of the data. You can see anything below a couple of hundred ions per, a couple of hundred electron volts per ion electron pair is a good number. We're right now are operating somewhere in the vicinity of 70 to 80 electron volts per electron ion pair. which is a very comfortable place to be for ionization cost. And in this device, we noticed that the plasma output tripled by doubling the power. And that scaling was very important to notice that the device got actually better as the power increased. So noticing then, of course, that this is fundamentally a high-power device. We also moved out of NASA at that time, in December of 2007. We found our new home, and we got located in our new facility in Houston. We also made a very important transition to the superconducting magnet. We had never worked with superconductors. And in May of 2009, we finished the construction of the first cryogen-free superconducting magnet. This was actually done in the UK by a small company, Scientific Magnetics. Did a great job in building this magnet for us. It is a magnet, like I said, it requires no cryogens. It is a low-temperature superconductor, and it is cooled by conduction, purely conduction, through very small cryocooler heads located at the base of the magnet. This magnet has been working since 2009, giving us excellent results, and we have operated now the device like for about 3 years with no ill effects and no apparent degradation of the magnet. So we're very comfortable with that. This is the VX200, which is the device that we built after the VX100, and this is as far as we will go in terms of power for now. The 200 kilowatts power level gets us in a very comfortable place for commercial operations. So you can see here the engine. Now the entire engine is actually sitting inside our new vacuum chamber, and you can see here a discharge. The plasma is very bright, very hot, very stable, and has very good performance. These are actual data, recent data in that device with different campaigns. And you can see here how the efficiency of the device has moved as the power level increases, the exhaust velocity increases. We are now operating somewhere in the 72% efficient regime, which is a very nice place to be. Important thing here in the second graph is how the thrust of the device scales with DC input power. You can see that the scaling is linear. So far, we have seen in the VX200 is that the thrust is going to increase linearly with power, and we don't see any indication of tapering off or turning over or saturation of any kind at this point. We have already passed the 200 kilowatt mark, and it's continuing to behave that way. We expect that at some point it will turn over, but we haven't found that yet. We're going to continue to probe that boundary. We have a lot of diagnostics that have been developed in-house, and some that have been borrowed from the fusion community, very high-power plasma diagnostics. You can see here the whole suite, the whole array of these diagnostics that are presented in front of the plasma jet to allow us to do measurements in many different ways, scanning the entire plume across and up and down. So that's very important. Let's talk quickly about the relationship with NASA. We privatized, of course, in 2006, and at the time Mike Griffin brokered the relationship, which began in the early 2006 with this letter that was sent to us from him, in which he indicated the potential use of the technology by the space agency to do reboost and orbit maintenance of the ISS, among other uses, and of course use the actual platform that we were intending to build to support other NASA objectives, scientific objectives. Since then, we've signed several agreements with the space agency. We have an umbrella agreement right now in place with the Johnson Space Center, which enables us to work together collaboratively in this project, and that has been in place. And this agreement, this second agreement, actually has small packages inside the agreement. It's an umbrella agreement that allows us to then introduce areas of collaboration as they come alive. And then the third agreement, which was signed in December of 2008, was signed at the NASA headquarters level for demonstration. This is the title of the agreement. This is for the demonstration of the variable specific impulse magnetoplasma rocket aboard the International Space Station. And this is the agreement we are marching to at this point. And just to give you a sense for how we are viewing the road to space, this is essentially what has happened and what we envision will happen in the next few years. So here we show where we have come from, and it shows where we're going. And you can see that as time has passed, we have gradually matured the technology with the private investment. So with the various embodiments of the rocket, the VX-50, the VX-100, and now the VX-200, we've moved up into the technology readiness level, higher levels of technology readiness. And we are now, at this point, with a number of milestones that have been achieved already, and of course, still many milestones to go. These are located here, and you can imagine the usual preliminary design review, critical design, and so on to get to space. Our plan is to develop two engines simultaneously, the VF-200-1, 200 kilowatts, and the VF-200-2, also 200 kilowatts, is a twin of the first one, and this is part of our business strategy. Right now, this engine, the first one, will be integrated into a platform called the Aurora. It is a power and propulsion test platform, and we've been working with the space station program to find the proper location to establish this this platform. Right now, the technical team has determined that the Z1 truss, starboard looking, is the right place, and this is what we've been working on. And you can see here a conceptual design of what this platform would look like. The engine attached at the top. The engine has two nozzles. It is a double barrel engine at 200 kilowatts, and the reason for that is that one of the nozzles will be a right-handed nozzle, and the other one will be a left-handed nozzle. So the magnetic field, in essence, cancels out, and we have zero net effect on the magnetic moment by the Earth magnetic field. So there's no torquing on the platform as a result of the Earth. And it'll go in the middle of the station, obviously near the center of mass. It's interesting to us to just offset it a little bit in order to be able to measure the actual performance. So we have here what amounts to a orbiting thrust test or thrust stand of the best kind, essentially a laboratory in space. Here you can see various forms of the platform. Obviously, the space station does not have 200 kilowatts to give us, so our strategy is to store the energy at low power from trickle charges from the station solar arrays, no more than 3 to 5 kilowatts over several days. We store this energy in a battery pack, and then we fire. We fire for 15 minutes at full power, 200 kilowatts, for the full performance. However, we can do longer firings at, say, 100 kilowatts for half an hour and so on. So this is the way the test campaign will be conducted. And we'll be set up for about 300 of these firings. It'll all be delivered to space, to the station. Of course, the shuttle does not work anymore. So we have been working with the two commercial companies that have been granted potential access to the ISS, Orbital Sciences and SpaceX. And this is the SpaceX, the Orbital Sciences version, with the Aurora platform sitting atop the Cygnus vehicle. So basically, the Cygnus vehicle will deliver the package to the vicinity of the station. It will be picked up by the remote manipulator, which will then deliver it to a intermediate point up in the MBS, located on the railing, main truss of the station. When that is done, the arm will detach the Cygnus and essentially get rid of it, and then reposition itself to another location on the MDS to then pick up the package again from most likely this point of juncture right here, to pick up the actual package again and then deliver it to the final place at the starboard side of the Z1 truss, where a couple of spacewalking astronauts would be there to do all of the electrical and structural connections. Then the radiators will be opened, and we will be then ready to fire. These radiators, turns out in more recent work, we've eliminated most of these radiators. It turns out that for these kinds of tests, the rocket does not need such large radiating surfaces. So the package is getting a little bit smaller, but so far these are the images that we have. So let's talk quickly about the market. Obviously, we're interested in the very large global space activity, $276 billion in 2010, very large sum of money that we believe we would like to be a player in. And everybody knows now that the space station will be serviced by commercial companies, so access to space is going to be very diverse as we see it in the future. And so we see a market that has to do with the servicing, the orbiting, and conditioning of the infrastructure of satellites orbiting the planet. Very important requirement for the planet to have that infrastructure working well. And we have a very crowded sky. Tens of thousands of these satellites need to be either removed or repositioned or refurbished, and we see an opportunity there. So our first order of business would be to move into this regime. But we see a very wide set of opportunities in the near-Earth space. We're not really developing this rocket right now to go to Mars with human beings. I think contrary to popular belief, our most interesting concern right now, interesting area of work is low Earth orbit, satellite servicing, and perhaps eventually supporting transportation of cargo from many different countries to the vicinity of the moon, eventually asteroids and so on. So very rich potential market. So the business that we see comes basically into two sections. In the near to medium term, short to medium term, 2015 to 2025, we're talking about the use of the basic PF200 design as primary propulsion in a generic electric propulsion space tug which will then be used for satellite repositioning, refueling, refurbishing services, and of course the end-of-life disposal of these some of these birds that are been orbiting there for years, dead. We would modify the VF200 engine to use it as a single core at about 100 kilowatts, and here we would provide services for commercial reboost and drag compensation of large orbiting space stations. We don't see the ISS to be the only one. I think ISS is right now the only one, but there are others in the drawing board. Other countries are planning their own space station. Compensation. And then we also see it as primary propulsion for deep space robotic missions to Mars, other places in deep space. This would be maybe of interest to NASA, ESA, other international agencies, and we would be interested in discussing these possibilities with all these entities. In the long term, this is a long time from now, essentially, we would add the primary propulsion for human deep space vehicles. Now, this is controversial because it requires nuclear power. And we are not in the business of developing nuclear power. We hope that at some point in the future, nations, maybe not necessarily the US, but perhaps other nations will choose to develop space nuclear power. It will be an essential development, an essential element in any human robust presence in deep space. And until we do that, I don't think we're going to go very far with our conventional chemical rockets. But so we leave that as a potential development for the future. Here is a, back to the near term, here is a mission that we have developed for the orbiting 10 polar low Earth orbit satellites that may be dead. So this is a very unique set of maneuvers where we actually move up, pick up a satellite to have to bring it down by a small delta V change from 800 kilometers altitude to about 350 kilometers, at which point we then drop the satellite. The mass of the vehicle drops suddenly for about a ton, and then we do a plane change using propellant to move to a 36-degree change in plane in a polar orbit, but still change the plane, pick up another satellite, deorbit that one, drop it, another plane change, another satellite, and so on. And we can do that on a single mission 10 times to the orbit, 10 satellites in 10 different orbital planes. So this is a very nice capability that cannot be achieved with conventional propulsion today. This one here shows the advantage of electric propulsion for reboosting or drag compensation of the space station. For example, the space station right now is operating at about here in terms of the cost of reboost or the cost of drag maintenance or drag compensation. And this is because you need to transport all of this propellant to be able to use it in pushing the station. The cost is a very strong function of the specific impulse, and as you move to a higher specific impulse, then you drop down to the knee of the curve, and this is where we would operate at 4,000, maybe even 3,000 seconds of specific impulse, using a krypton-based Vasimer, and the solar power in the neighborhood of 50 to about 100 kilowatts. This will give you enough thrust to be able to do this work, reducing the cost by a factor of the order of 10 or 20 So this is a very nice use of the technology. This one here shows advantages of solar-based missions, robotic missions to Mars, as opposed to chemical. Again, the payload capability using a conventional chemical launcher to Mars is this line right here. And what you can see here is a great advantage in payload capability depending on the solar array power efficiency, 10 kilograms per kilowatt being you know, very conservative, but still is aggressive, but still conservative in terms of the capability for development. So you can see here almost a tripling in the payload, useful payload that you can deliver to Mars using the technology. So another advantage. And then this last one here that I wanted to show you is this deep space catapult that we have been working on. It's a technique whereby we launch from Earth, solar-based. We launch from low Earth orbit and we drive the spacecraft towards the Sun, passing between Venus and Mercury. In this green trajectory, a great deal of sunshine is plentiful because we're closer to the Sun. And so we take advantage of the enhancement on power. We will not need a solar array with a concentrator in this case because there's plenty of sun. So during this trajectory, the spacecraft accelerates, and at this point, you essentially release the payload, and the payload goes on its way to its destination, in this case, Jupiter. The entire transit from Earth all the way to Jupiter, it takes about 3 years, and there's no gravity assist. It's essentially a plain acceleration using solar electric propulsion, 4 metric tons payload. 3-year transit is a lot better than 5, which is what the Juno mission will take to get to Jupiter. That was launched, I think, last year. The point that's interesting for us is that at this point, the tug and the payload depart, and the tug then comes around and repositions again in Earth orbit and prepares for another mission. So this is a recoverable tug able to launch these packages to points deep into the solar system. So this would be a nice thing to develop for the future. And I think that was the end. That was my last chart. I think I wanted to just thank you for the attention and the opportunity to speak with you. And I don't know if there's any need for or any questions that I can answer.
I think we have time for 2 questions, Franklin, so let's see if there's anybody in the audience who wants to ask.
Okay, great.
I don't see any questions right now, so thank you very much, Franklin. That was terrific. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
It's a pleasure. Good luck to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't see our... Could be. Okay, too many presentations. You mean a rich variety, so now we can't find that one picture we wanted to show while I'm bidding you farewell, Bado, in a way. I hope that all the volunteers are here who helped us, because I know that it's normal to end the you know, after your speech, you say, oh, thank you to various people. We've already thanked the sponsors and, of course, our partners, like the ISU. But now I would like to thank the 4 students volunteers that made this conference move smoothly along, enhancing the comfort for all of us. And I would like to invite them to stand up to be acknowledged for their contribution. Rachel Samples, is she in the room? Yeah. Gary Gilbert. Oh, well. Andrew Henry. And Megan Kane. We thank you for your efforts and the execution of the myriad of tasks we gave you. You did very well. Thank you. And now, if we had a magic wand, we would wave it to get rid of budget constraints, to get rid of any political constraints, to get rid of space radiation, to cut the duration of the trip at least by half, and to change over to gravity on board our spacecraft en route to Mars, just like that. Regrettably, we have no magic wand. However, what we do have is many brilliant minds, dedicated people, willing to work hard and contribute all their acuity to the task of getting humans beyond low Earth orbit. In short, we have us. It's clear to me that we need all of us, plus our colleagues, as the optimum moment for humans to Mars mission is apparently between 2033 and 2035, when the cycle of orbital mechanics and the cycle of solar activity overlap. So that's, you know, a bit like 22, 23 years to get them there. So we better get everything ready. Well, the speakers in this conference gave me the confidence that we can do it. Also, I know that mission architectures exist that would have us execute such missions completely within the current NASA human spaceflight budget. If you want to read about those mission architectures, I invite you to our free online magazine, Mars Exploration Magazine, that we will be publishing online in the summer of this year. If you want to discuss and plan all the incremental steps we need to take between being here and now and getting humans to Mars, then have them do research on Mars and bring them back safely, I invite you to our Humans to Mars Summit in spring next year. In the meantime, I invite all of us to cooperate as much as is possible in working to use the ISS for human missions beyond low Earth orbit. I am convinced if we can dream it, we can do it. Let's go out and do it.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our speakers, and have safe travels.